Envelope had been sitting in my cardigan pocket for 11 days. I'd transferred it from pocket to pocket every morning, moving it when I changed clothes, tucking it back before my son-in-law could see the outline through the fabric. It was just a folded piece of paper, really. A name and a phone number written in blue ballpoint by a woman at the credit union who had noticed me standing at the counter for too long, staring at a balance I didn't recognize in an account I'd never agreed to open. Her name was Faye. She worked the Tuesday window. She had a small photograph of two grandchildren taped next to her computer monitor, and she'd looked at me over the rim of her reading glasses and said, very quietly, "Do you have somewhere safe to go?" I'd said yes automatically. I'd said yes automatically. I always said yes automatically. That was the problem. It started the way most things do when you're too close to see them clearly. Gradually. One small thing at a time, each reasonable on its own, until the whole picture is something you can't explain to anyone without sounding ungrateful or confused. My daughter Penny had married Victor 3 years after my husband Gerald passed away. Penny was 41. Victor was 43, with two grown kids from a first marriage and a talent for making things sound practical and sensible when they were anything but. I liked him at first. He was organized, capable, the kind of man who researches water heaters for 6 months before buying one. I told Penny she'd found someone solid. Gerald and I had lived in our house on Clover Ridge Road for 31 years, a three-bedroom colonial with a detached garage and a backyard full of the azaleas I'd planted the spring after we moved in. Gerald died quietly of a heart attack on a Sunday morning in November. He was in the kitchen making pancakes. I was upstairs getting dressed for church. I came down and he was gone. That was 8 years ago, and I still sometimes catch myself listening for the sound of him flipping those pancakes. I managed on my own for 5 of those years. I had Gerald's pension from the school district where he'd worked as a facilities manager for 26 years, and my own social security, which wasn't much, but was mine. I drove myself to the grocery store and the doctor and the library. I had a standing Tuesday lunch with my friend Opal from church, and every other Thursday I went to a quilting group at the community centre in Millbrook. My life was quiet, but it was mine, fully and without apology. Then I fell. A stupid thing. I tripped over the garden hose I'd left coiled near the back steps, went down hard on the patio, and fractured my wrist in 2 places. I was 68 years old and suddenly couldn't drive, couldn't cook properly, couldn't manage the stairs comfortably for nearly 2 months. Penny flew in from Raleigh the next day. Victor came the following weekend with a rented minivan and a binder. He actually brought a binder. Inside it were printed pages about senior living transitions and estate tape planning timelines and a comparison of 3 different financial management services. He sat at my kitchen table and went through it with me like he was presenting a proposal to a client. Penny sat beside him, holding my good hand, her eyes wide and sorry. "Mum, we've been worried about you living alone," she said. "This fall just proves what we've been thinking." I told them I was fine, that it was a hose on a patio, not a stroke. But my wrist was in a cast and I couldn't quite get the lid off the ibuprofen bottle on my own. And Victor had a way of continuing to speak calmly after you said no, as if you hadn't said anything at all. "They moved in 3 weeks later, temporarily," Penny said, "just to help you get back on your feet. Victor worked remotely. It would be easy. It would be good." Within 4 months, Victor had his name added to my checking account. I want to be clear about how that happened, because it didn't happen the way you might think. There was no argument, no confrontation. There was a Sunday afternoon when he mentioned casually that he'd spoken with someone at my bank about streamlining things. That since I'd had a little trouble with the online banking, I'd called him once when I couldn't remember a password. It might make sense for him to have access so he could handle things when I needed help. He slid a form across the table. Penny was in the garden. I signed it. I signed it because I was tired and my wrist still ached, and he had already made me feel, in 100 small ways, like I was slightly less capable than I used to be. Not dramatically, not cruelly. He never raised his voice. He just had a particular tone he used when I asked questions about my own finances, A patient, measured tone, the kind you use with someone who keeps losing their train of thought. Within 6 months, Gerald's pension and my social security were both direct deposited into an account that was, technically, still mine, but was managed almost entirely by Victor. He paid the bills. He paid for groceries, which he did himself now because he said I didn't always remember to check expiration dates. He gave me $300 a month in cash for what he called personal expenses. When I asked for more, he would pull up a spreadsheet on his laptop and walk me through current projections and household costs and tax implications, and by the end, I would feel so lost in the numbers that I'd forget what I'd asked for in the first place. I stopped meeting Opal for Tuesday lunches. Victor had asked very reasonably whether it was wise to be driving in winter now that I was 70, and I'd started to wonder the same thing, which had been the point. Opal called for a while, and then she didn't. I told myself I'd reach out when things settled down. I stopped going to the quilting group. Victor mentioned once that the community centre parking lot wasn't great at night, and that the drive to Millbrook on Route 9 was tricky in the dark. And wasn't that mostly an evening thing? It was a 4 o'clock thing, actually, home by 6, but somehow I stopped going anyway. The house was still my house. My name was still on the deed, but I'd stopped feeling like I lived there. I felt like I was a guest who'd been there so long that everyone had forgotten to be polite about it. The moment I understood clearly what was happening was a Tuesday in March. I'd been invited to a memorial service for a woman from church, Rosemary Tillett, who had died in February. I'd known Rosemary for 15 years. We'd served on the hospitality committee together. I wanted to bring flowers to her family. I went to Victor to ask for money from my own account for a bouquet. He looked up from his laptop and said, "How much are you thinking?" "We're a little tight this month with the HVAC service and the property tax installment." I stood there in my own kitchen in the house I had owned for 31 years and asked permission to buy flowers for a dead friend's family. I said, "Victor, that's my pension. Those are my funds." He said, "Of course they are. I'm just trying to be responsible with our overall cash flow." He said, "Our." I took $20 from my personal cash allowance and bought a small bunch of daffodils from the grocery store. At the service, Rosemary's daughter hugged me and said her mother had talked about me often. I stood at the back of the church and cried harder than I had in years, and not entirely for Rosemary. The woman at the credit union, Faye, had seen me 6 days after that. I'd gone in to ask about making a withdrawal in person because I no longer had easy access to my debit card, which Victor kept in the household folder he maintained in the Home Office. He always said I could have it when I needed it, which was true. I just had to ask him for it, which was the problem. Faye had processed my withdrawal and then done something that took me a moment to understand. She slid a sticky note across the counter, face down. On it was a name, Shirley Beckett, MSW, and a phone number, and the words, Family Independence Network. "I can't recommend anything officially," Faye said, her voice low, "but this organization helps people in situations that are hard to describe." She looked at me steadily. "My aunt used them." I put the sticky note in my pocket and walked to my car and sat there for a long time before I drove home. For 11 days I carried that piece of paper and didn't call. I told myself I was overreacting. Victor hadn't hit me, hadn't threatened me, hadn't even spoken to me unkindly. He helped around the house. He took me to my doctor's appointments. From the outside, if you looked at it a certain way, he was a son-in-law taking good care of an aging widow. From the inside, I felt like I had slowly been removed from my own life and replaced with a more manageable version of myself that required less maintenance and asked fewer questions. I called on a Thursday morning while Victor was on a work call in the Home Office and Penny had gone to the pharmacy. I stepped outside to the back patio and dialed with my hands shaking. Shirley Beckett answered on the second ring. She had a warm voice, unhurried, the kind that didn't fill silences right away. I told her I wasn't sure I had a real problem, that I was probably making too much of things. She said that was fine. She said, "Tell me what's been happening," and I did, and she let me talk for a long time without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "What you're describing has a name. It's called financial exploitation of an older adult, and it's one of the most common forms of elder abuse in the country. It often happens within families." I heard the word abuse and felt my whole chest tighten. "He's my daughter's husband," I said, as if that changed something. "I know," Shirley said. "That's exactly what makes it so difficult to see clearly." She told me about the Family Independence Network. They worked with adults over 60 in situations involving financial control, isolation, and coercive oversight by family members. She asked me if I'd be able to come into their office, not on a day when anyone would notice, when Victor was occupied and Penny was out. We made an appointment for the following Tuesday at 10:30 in the morning. Penny had her standing appointment at the nail salon on Tuesday mornings. Victor had a weekly 11 o'clock video call. I would have a window of about 2 hours. I walked back inside and started making a grocery list like nothing had happened. Shirley worked out of a small office suite on Meridian Street, above a framing shop. The waiting room had pale yellow walls and a tall plant in the corner, and a woman at the front desk who looked up and smiled like she'd been expecting someone exactly like me. I was shown to a back office. Shirley was in her mid-50s, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the kind of calm that felt earned rather than performed. She made me a cup of tea. She let me tell the story again, and this time she took notes. "Has your name been removed from any of these accounts?" she asked. "No," I said. "The account is still in my name. He was added." "That's important," she said. "It's still legally your account. Your funds, your pension, and your social security are yours by law. No one has the right to control how you access them or how you spend them." I knew that technically, but knowing something and feeling it are different things when someone has spent 2 years making you doubt your own judgment. Shirley connected me with an attorney named Douglas Alcott who worked with the organization on a reduced fee basis for clients in financial exploitation cases. He was 60 himself, with a no-nonsense way of talking that I appreciated. He explained that I had the right to remove Victor from my account at any time, to redirect my direct deposits, to reclaim full control of my own finances. None of that required Victor's signature. None of it required Penny's permission. "But," Douglas said, "the harder question is housing. This is your home, and you have every right to remain in it. If you want them to leave, that is a conversation that will need to happen. I can help you prepare for it." I thought about that for a long time after I left his office. The hardest part wasn't the finances. The finances were, as Douglas said, fairly straightforward to reclaim. The hardest part was Penny. My daughter was not a bad person. I want to say that plainly because it's true. She had been worn down by years of Victor's practicality, his plans, his binders, until she'd forgotten how to push back. She hadn't conspired against me. She'd simply stopped seeing what was happening because it was easier not to. I had done the same thing at the beginning. I went back to Shirley every Tuesday for 5 weeks. We made a plan. First, documents. My original deed, my Social Security card, my Medicare card, Gerald's pension documentation, 3 years of bank statements, the form where I'd added Victor to my account. All of these lived in a file box in the home office that Victor now used. I waited for a Saturday afternoon when he drove Penny to a furniture store in the next town over. A trip they'd mentioned would take most of the afternoon. I spent 45 minutes at the FedEx location on Oak Street, making copies of everything. The woman at the counter didn't ask why my hands were trembling. I was grateful for that. Second, money. Shirley had a discretionary fund for clients in transition. She loaned me $500 to open a new individual checking account at a different bank entirely. Not the credit union, not the bank where Victor had access. A fresh account, my name only, with my cell phone as the contact number. A cell phone I purchased with $60 in cash from the discretionary fund, a basic prepaid model, registered under my name only, kept at the bottom of my winter coat pocket. I changed my Social Security direct deposit first. That took a phone call to the Social Security Administration and about 25 minutes on hold. Gerald's pension required a form mailed to the school district's benefits office. I sent it certified mail from the post office on a Tuesday morning on my way to see Shirley. I did not tell Penny any of this. That was the hardest part of all. Third, I needed to decide whether I was leaving my own home or asking them to leave. Douglas had outlined both paths clearly. I had the stronger legal position as the owner, but if things became hostile, there could be a process. Shirley helped me understand that I didn't have to rush the decision. I could reclaim financial control first, which I did, and then address the living situation from a position of stability rather than fear. Victor noticed the missing direct deposits about 3 weeks after I redirected them. He came to me in the kitchen one evening with his laptop open, his face very still in the way it got when he was working through something he hadn't anticipated. "I'm seeing some gaps in the household account," he said. "Your deposits haven't come in this month." I looked at him. My hands were perfectly still. "I redirected them," I said. He stared at me for a moment. "To where?" "To my account," I said. "My individual account." "Judith." He said my name the way he always did when he was about to explain something to me. "That doesn't make sense from a household management standpoint." "Victor," I said. "I've spoken with an attorney. The account was always mine. I appreciate the help you've provided, but I'm handling my own finances from here on." He stood there holding his laptop, and I watched him reassess. He was a practical man. He understood when a situation had changed. He went and found Penny. The conversation with my daughter was the hardest hour of my life, harder than Gerald's funeral, harder than signing the hospital paperwork when he was declared gone. She cried. She said she didn't know. She said she'd just been trying to help, that Victor had said I was struggling, that she'd trusted him. She said, "Mum, why didn't you just tell me?" I said, "Because I didn't have the words for it yet, and because I wasn't sure you'd be able to hear it while you were still inside it." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "What do you need from me?" That was when I started crying too. "We asked Victor to leave," Penny asked him. She sat across from him at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd shown me the binder 3 years before, and told him she needed space to repair the relationship with her mother. He tried several approaches, the practical, the wounded, the aggrieved. He pointed out all he'd done for the household, all the management he'd taken on. Douglas had prepared me for this. I had documentation. I had dates, account records, the form. Victor was a practical man. He left within the week. Penny stayed. For 2 months she slept in the guest room, and we were careful with each other, like people walking on new ice, testing each weight before committing. We talked more in those 2 months than we had in years. She told me things about her marriage I hadn't known. I told her about Shirley, about Faye at the credit union, about the envelope I'd carried in my pocket for 11 days. She cried again. I let her. Opal came back too. I called her first, and she drove over the same afternoon and sat with me at the kitchen table for 3 hours. She said, "I kept wondering what happened. I thought maybe I'd done something. I apologized for disappearing." She told me to stop apologizing and handed me a piece of her coffee cake. I went back to quilting group on a Thursday in October. The women there were gracious about it, the way women of a certain age tend to be. No one made a fuss. Connie Aldridge, who's been running the group for years, just handed me a basket of fabric squares and said, "We're doing a lap quilt this month. Pull up a chair." The financial piece took longer to fully untangle. The school district's benefits office needed follow-up documentation. Gerald's pension took 2 months to redirect properly. Victor had managed several automatic payments under my name, and I went through each one. Douglas was patient and thorough. By January, every dollar of income I had was flowing into accounts that only I could access. Penny and I eventually found our footing. She enrolled in therapy. We started a new ritual, Saturday breakfast together, at the diner on Millbrook Road, the one Gerald and I used to take her to when she was small. She orders the same thing every time. So do I. It feels like a way of stitching something back together that I'd thought was beyond repair. Last month, I got a call from a woman named Shirley. Not my Shirley, a different woman, referred to the Family Independence Network by a doctor's office in the next county. She was 66. Her son and daughter-in-law had moved in to help her after her hip replacement. She had a binder story too. The details were different. The shape of it was identical. I went with Shirley to the office on Meridian Street, and I sat in that room with the yellow walls, and I made her a cup of tea, and I said, "Tell me what's been happening." She talked for a long time. I let her. When she finished, I said what Shirley had said to me because it was the truest thing I'd heard in years. I said, "What you're describing has a name, and there are people who can help you. You don't have to figure this out alone." She looked at her hands, then she looked at me. "How did you get out?" she asked. "Slowly," I said, and then all at once. I still have the sticky note that Faye slid across the credit union counter. I keep it in the recipe box in my kitchen, tucked inside the index card for Gerald's mother's apple cake, a recipe I've been making again since last fall. The house on Clover Ridge Road still has the azaleas in the back. I've been tending them again. This spring they came in better than they have in years. Some things, if you give them back the right conditions, will find their way back to themselves. That's what I know now. That's what I'd tell any woman standing at a counter somewhere, holding a piece of paper she's not sure what to do with. Hold on to it. Make the call. It doesn't have to make sense yet. It just has to be the next right thing. I think about the binder a lot. That 3-ring binder Victor carried into my kitchen like a man arriving with a blueprint for someone else's life. At the time, I thought it was just his way, organized, thorough, practical to a fault. Now I understand it for what it was, the first move in a very long game, not a violent one, not a loud one, the quietest kind where you don't realize the walls are closing until there's barely room to breathe. What happened to me didn't happen because I was weak. I want to say that plainly because for a long time I believed it did. I believed I should have seen it sooner, pushed back harder, been smarter. But the truth is that what Victor did was methodical. He didn't take anything from me all at once. He took it in increments, each one small enough to explain away, until the sum of all those small things was everything. My accounts, my friendships, my confidence in my own memory. My sense of what I was owed as a woman who had worked, raised a child, built a home, and buried a husband, all of it quietly rearranged so that I needed his permission to buy daffodils for a dead friend's family. That's not weakness on my part, that's a particular kind of harm that knows exactly how to make itself invisible. What I had to find, and it took time, and a sticky note from a woman named Faye and 5 weeks of Tuesday appointments on Meridian Street, was the clarity to see it for what it was, not adjusting, not helping, not practical household management, exploitation. The word felt enormous the first time Shirley said it out loud. Then it felt like the truest thing anyone had said to me in years. There's something I know now that I didn't know at 68, standing in my own kitchen feeling vaguely apologetic for existing, doing the right thing, the honest thing, the fair thing, that has consequences that ripple outward, whether you can see them or not. Victor made choices that slowly corroded trust, isolated people who loved each other, and bent a family toward his convenience. Those choices came back to him, not as punishment from somewhere outside, just as the natural end of what happens when you build something on a foundation of control. It doesn't hold. And there's something else. Knowing that something is wrong isn't enough on its own. I knew. I felt it for months before I could name it. What changed was what I did with that knowing, the call I made from the back patio, the copies I made with shaking hands, the new account I opened with $50 and a prepaid phone. Intelligence without the courage to act on it is just a quiet suffering. I had to use what I understood to do something, even slowly, even one Tuesday at a time. Penny is in therapy now. We have Saturday breakfasts. We're rebuilding something that I was afraid was gone past fixing. I think about what it cost both of us to get here. The years of distance, the silences, the things said too late or not at all. And I think the cost was real, and it mattered. But we're here, and the azaleas are blooming again. If there is a woman reading this who is carrying something in her pocket that she hasn't opened yet, a card, a number, a thought she keeps pushing down, I just want to say the call does not have to make sense before you make it. You are allowed to be uncertain and right at the same time. Hold on to it, make the call,